So today I thought it would be interesting to explore something that's been on my mind quite a bit lately. I don't really know how to explain it and I don't really know where to start necessarily, so I'm just going to say some words and hopefully something will come out. I guess I guess if I had to start somewhere, I would start with the phrase that I used to hear my mum say quite a bit when I was little, when I was growing up, and as a child, I would hear other parents around me say really similar things as well. And that phrase is, so for a bit of context, I am clearly Asian. I was born and raised in an Asian country, specifically in Southeast Asia. I am also Gen Y, so I'm a 90s baby. And a lot of my friends growing up were basically raised in families that were really similar to mine in a socioeconomic sense. So that would be somewhat a developing countries version of working to middle-ish class. Very heavy emphasis on education and academic achievements, of which sadly I had none, and a very stifling sense of overprotection or over-sheltering the child. So coming back to this phrase, study first, boys later, what that basically means is as a girl growing up in that situation, my parents basically expected that I would focus 100% of my attention on my studies, on school, and leave boys and dating and relationships for much later on in life. Actually, I would say that that's a bit of an oversimplification, because what these parents were trying to convey was this idea that you should prioritize financial security over everything else. What that means to them is, as a child, you focus on your education first, you get really good grades, you get into a really good university, you get a really good job, and you get to a point where you're really financially secure to the exclusion of everything else. And then after you're financially secure, and only after that point, then you can think about boys, and you can think about romance and relationships and hobbies and interests and the way you look and whatever else catches your fancy. Then you can think about those things and you can go off and do them. But before you're financially secure, you're meant to just direct 100% of your attention on your academic performance and subsequent supposed financial stability that comes with that. So I think some of this does have an overlap with tiger parenting. And tiger parenting, I think, is a term that's used more in the States. We didn't really use the term tiger parenting in my home country because, not because it didn't exist, but because it was just called parenting. So based on this paper that I found, which I will link below, tiger parenting is, and this is not very good because the paper is a secondary reference and the primary reference is a book that I can't be bothered to read, but basically tiger parents tend to be more authoritarian. So they think that, they know what's best for the child, and in some cases this sense of knowing what's best is absolute, and that means it can override the child's preferences and their desires. And by the way, just to be clear, I'm not talking about situations where a child wants to have chocolate for breakfast and the parents are saying no because they know better. That is not at all what I'm referring to. When I talk about authoritarian, I'm talking about situations where a child may want to pursue an art degree, for example, and the parents say, no, you're going to medical school because that's what's best for your future. Obviously, that seems to be a bit of an extreme example, but when I was growing up, that was so prevalent around me everywhere that it just felt really common, and it felt like that's just how life is. I guess I do have a bit of a less extreme example. It's actually a personal example. So when I was growing up, I took piano lessons, and this was not something that we talked about. It was not part of the discussion. It's just something that I did as, by my dad's decree. And sometimes after school I would want to go and do fun things, like maybe go to a friend's house and, listen to music and stuff. And my dad would say no, because I haven't practiced the piano for the number of hours that he has set for me. And that's usually between 2 to 4 hours daily. So I wouldn't be able to do the fun thing that I wanted to do. I instead had to spend the afternoon practicing piano. Spoiler alert, I never practiced the piano all that much because I guess I was just really lazy and I was a really terrible Asian child. But yeah, I guess that's just to illustrate the point that That's the level of control that tiger parents would expect to have over their children's lives. So the other thing to know about tiger parents is what I've kind of already mentioned, that really heavy emphasis on academic success to the possible exclusion of everything else. So growing up, a lot of my peers would go to school from about 7, 8 in the morning to about 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It sort of varies depending on school and the day. After school, they would go for external tuition. So this would either be with a private tutor, or it would be in a classroom setting, or a mix of both. So it's kind of school after school every single day, and sometimes on weekends. I never really went through that, thankfully, because my parents placed a lot of emphasis on music achievement. So I was classically trained as a pianist from a fairly young age, and a lot of my afternoons and evenings would be spent falling asleep on the piano, because at that time I just really could not give a shit about Mozart or Beethoven. Basically, the point I'm trying to make is that a lot of time and money and effort was spent trying to milk all of that academic success, and there was way less emphasis placed on I don't know, building healthy friendships, or socializing your child appropriately, or building up interests and hobbies, unless it's classical piano, building up self-esteem, building up confidence, anything to do with psychological health. I mean, mental health growing up was a bit of a joke. So what am I trying to say, really? I guess I don't really know. I just have a lot of mixed feelings and convoluted thoughts about this subject, because even when I was growing up, I never really subscribed to the paradigm of study first, boys later, everything else later. And it wasn't because I knew better. It wasn't because I was so sure of myself. It was not that at all. It was simply because I was such an awful student. I mean, I remember every single results day at school. It would just be utterly humiliating for my poor mother, because I was just such a shit student compared to my peers. And for the record, I wasn't really failing anything. I mean, I think my GCSEs turned out to be mostly A's with a couple of B's. So that was pretty atrocious, because my peers would have like 11 A stars. Right now, I'm at a point in life where I could comfortably say that it doesn't really matter to me. But honestly, just thinking back, bless my poor mother. And you can also imagine the kinds of, the rifts that it would cause in a parent-child relationship. So all of that was really great to deal with in my developmental years. Yeah, I guess I'm trying to say that even though I did not, and I still don't subscribe to that paradigm of putting your studies above everything else, it still did affect me in my developmental years in terms of my mental well-being, social and developmental skills. But even more than that, I watched some of the people around me grow up in that and have it so much worse than myself. So there were all these high-achieving kids that are now high-achieving adults who are very successful in life, but they have absolutely no idea what they want in a relationship, in a friendship. They have no clue what a healthy dynamic between two people could possibly look like. They may have a truckload of psychological baggage that they're just sort of carrying around. And I think some of them, they do develop some coping mechanisms for that, but it's really hard to tell if they're actually functional, long-term skills to manage, or if you're just putting a band-aid over the problem and you're just pretending it doesn't exist. And that's actually quite an Asian thing as well. Just, if there's a problem, just pretend it's invisible, pretend it's not there. If it's embarrassing, pretend it doesn't exist. And if you pretend hard enough, it goes away. And that is, to me, one of the more dangerous and less glamorous sides of Asian culture and Asian values. I also watched a lot of these then kids, now adults, just disintegrate and under that paradigm. There are a handful of people I know who were sort of forced to go into medical school because that's what's best for their future. according to their parents. And some of these people did really well, graduated and went on to be doctors and dentists. Some of them left not because they couldn't hack medical school, but because it was just not the right path for them. And some of them barely made it out alive in a literal sense, like literally driven to the edge of ending their lives. And of course, I'm not at all attributing all of these problems to tiger parenting. I'm not saying it's the parents' fault. That is definitely not what I am saying. A lot of these, psychological troubles can come from other things that happen in their developmental years. And you know what? A lot of people that I know who grew up with this parenting style would then go on and be quite successful and happy in life. So it's not just the parenting that is at play here. And I truly am not trying to bash tiger parenting whatsoever, even though I clearly am not a fan of it. I'm not trying to bash it, that's not what I'm trying to do here. So yeah, it got me thinking a little bit, and I was wondering, where does tiger parenting actually come from? So I did a quick search on Google, as everyone my age does, and the first couple of things that came up was that book that I mentioned earlier that I can't be bothered to read, and how tiger parenting is rooted in certain Chinese philosophy. And I mean, truthfully, I really can't be bothered to go that far back. I think the kind of tiger parenting that I experienced around me as a child, I think that comes from the fact that my parents and so many other Chinese families around me were fourth or fifth, I'm pretty sure I'm getting the number wrong here, but basically anywhere between third, fourth, fifth generation immigrants in a developing country, and life was just bloody hard. I mean, you're in a foreign country, speak a different language, it's been colonized multiple times by different powerhouse nations, and life is just a struggle. Everything is just so chaotic. What does that make you want the most? I mean, it makes perfect sense to me that you would first and foremost value security and stability. And in the country that I was raised in, once we got independence and we were a developing nation, the thing that buys security and stability is obviously money. So I think that my parents and the boomer generation of that particular country valued financial security above nearly everything else, because who gives a shit about psychological health when you are struggling to put food on the table? When I look at it through that lens, it makes absolute sense that that's what they would try to pass on to their children, because that was the model that their reality was built on, and that was what worked for them. And the types of jobs that were available at that time that brought financial security were things like being a doctor, being a lawyer, a dentist, your classic high-earning traditional jobs. The problem is that their children, so myself and my generation, were raised in an environment where we were primarily safe. We were fairly secure in terms of, we had a bed to sleep in, we had food on the table. We were fairly comfortable, we grew up physically safe in our homes, we were able to go to school every day. Most of us didn't have to work as children to support our families. And if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's no wonder that some people in this generation want to pursue non-traditional careers, or just think about things other than financial stability. So things that we like, for example, art, music, literature, language, philosophy, cultural studies. Because our immediate environment is secure, we've met those basic needs of food, shelter, and now we're looking for more. We're looking for things that would give us a sense of purpose, that feeling of belonging, that sense of accomplishment or actualization. Especially in the climate that my generation grew up in, we sort of vaguely remember a time before the internet, but social media and Wi-Fi was so pivotal in our developmental years. The world has never been more accessible to any individual. So the idea of just prioritizing purely financial stability to the exclusion of everything else, I mean, quite frankly, it just feels a bit small. And I recognize that I am saying that from a position of privilege, where my immediate surroundings, my environment was stable, safe and secure enough, and my basic needs were being met, and therefore I I have the time and space and capacity to think about other things other than food and water and shelter and basic needs. I do understand that not everyone had that privilege in the past, and some people still don't. But at the same time, and this may come off as selfish, but I can't live my life according to someone else's standards. And again, unfortunately, I don't think that a lot of boomers, again, strictly speaking about my home country, I don't think a lot of them really understand just how much there is to explore, how much knowledge and culture is at your fingertips if you just reach out to learn, and how that is worth dedicating time to for some people. Money is something that is absolutely necessary and valuable in order to maintain that safe environment, that, you know, that sense of security and being able to meet your basic needs. But once you're able to do that, there is so much more out there that is really worth dedicating your time to. And that is what people in my generation are looking for, I think. And while we still do prioritize financial stability, we are not necessarily, or I mean, I'll just speak for myself, I'm not necessarily going to prioritize that over everything else. I absolutely do not subscribe to the idea of working myself into the ground for the sake of financial security for the first half of my life and leaving my exploring and learning and dating and everything else in life to the latter half of my life. I don't think that's viable for me. And I'm not even saying that that's what these parents wanted for their children. All I'm saying is if you teach your children to put your studies first above everything else, just think of what the implicit message is behind that. I've had some people say to me, you know, the argument that tiger parenting, or like a version of it, could probably be quite good if you want to teach your kids things like discipline, resilience, and a phenomenal work ethic. And there are studies out there that indicate that Asian Americans are really high achieving and successful because of the way that they were brought up. I mean, I don't know the literature, I'm not an Asian American. I think it's a bit more nuanced than that. I think you also have to look at the cost that comes with that success and with those academic achievements. I mean, the literature also shows that, you know, people who are children of tiger parents tend to be more anxious. So, you know, it's a matter of balance, isn't it? It's a matter of weighing it up. And in my specific case, I mean, tiger parenting hasn't really worked for me at all. In fact, I learned to do the opposite of all the good things that it's meant to instill in a child. I learned how to be really avoidant. I learned how to shirk responsibility sometimes. I learned to escape my reality, not even physically, just mentally in my head. And actually, as an adult, I've had to unlearn all of that and teach myself all over again really basic things like how to delay gratification, how to be resilient, how to not only be disciplined and hardworking, but how to translate that hard work into being productive and efficient at the same time. And you know, those are skills that I definitely did not learn under the umbrella of tiger parenting. So yeah, I have very mixed feelings on this issue, but that's pretty much it. That's my rant over. If you have any thoughts, I love thoughts, so please leave them down in the comments below. And thank you very much for watching. If you made it to the end, you're a bit strange probably, but yeah, I really appreciate it. I need a drink now.